Fire Lady is the story of a Cockney flower girl, Eliza Doolittle, who is taught to speak like the upper class by a phonetics professor, Henry Higgins. It is a beloved musical, a rare flower that feels authentically English despite being written by two Yanks and an Irishman. The movie won 8 Oscars, including Best Picture, and it's on TV every Christmas. It's been parodied on Family Guy and The Simpsons.
I've grown accustomed to his face.
And even my dad, who cannot sing a note, can sing you
All I want is a room somewhere.
And the ending is wrong. This is something that's been known about for a long time, but got some attention recently in 2018 when Bartlett Sher's production opened at the Lincoln Centre. Several critics mentioned that the ending was changed. Now, Sher didn't change the script, the music, or the lyrics. So what happened? Well, to explain, we have to go right back to the beginning. It's well known that My Fair Lady is based on a George Bernard Shaw play, but we're going to have to go back even further than that, to the source of the original story in Ovid's Metamorphoses. In the Metamorphoses, the singer Orpheus tells the story of Pygmalion and the statue, in which a MGTOW sculptor called Pygmalion, who hates women for being vain and slutty, makes himself a perfect marble waifu body pillow instead, which he falls in love with, and Aphrodite turns her into a real boy. It's not overly concerned with the statue's perspective. She doesn't even have a name originally. Later versions of the story would call her Galatea. Ovid was one of the main writers on the curriculum for hundreds of years in Europe, so the story of Pygmalion and Galatea got turned into all sorts of paintings, poems, operas. Obviously, sculptors were drawn to the subject of a master sculptor at work, but it is a bit weird to look at a sculpture of a sculpture, especially when it looks exactly the same as the sculpture of a man. How am I supposed to know that she's The version that George Bernard Shaw's audience would probably be most familiar with is the 1871 play Pygmalion and Galatea by W.S. Gilbert, the same guy that did... In this version, Pygmalion is already married and makes a sculpture of his wife. But when Galatea comes to life, she's born sexy yesterday and too pure for this world, so she has to be statued again. It was wildly successful and revived several times during Gilbert's own lifetime. And then in 1913, Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw writes Pygmalion. Shaw is a fascinating character, socialist, contrarian, only winner of both a Nobel Prize and an Oscar, and holder of what is by modern standards a hodgepodge of progressive, regressive, and just plain strange opinions. His insistence on spelling won't without the apostrophe, his support of interracial marriage, his admiration for Stalin, his praise for Mussolini, his anti-vaccine stance, his pro-eugenics comments, his takedowns of anti-Semitism, and his promotion of a new 40-letter Shavian alphabet that looks like this. We don't have time to get into that here, but if you're interested about that stuff, Shaw has probably been more written about than any Anglophone writer except Shakespeare, so I'm sure you'll find discussion out there. You can even find a whole book just of his letters to the Times. What? What? Shaw wanted to tell the story from Galatea's point of view, and give it what he thought was a more realistic ending, as if Galatea were a real woman with her own thoughts and feelings, not a statue that was born sexy yesterday. So he sets the story in what, for him, is the modern day, 1910s London. Pygmalion is no longer a sculptor turning rough marble into art, but Henry Higgins, a phonetics professor who teaches tradespeople to speak like gentlemen. Galatea is still his masterpiece, but instead of a block of marble, she is Eliza Doolittle, a Cockney flower girl at the very bottom of society's ladder who is taught to speak and act like a duchess. So Eliza's not some diamond in the rough. At the beginning of the play, she whines.
They'll take away my canister and they'll drive me on the streets for singing.
She's a liar.
Liar! You said you could change half a crown.
And she gets hysterical at the drop of a hat.
Ow! Ow! Ow!
But throughout the play, she gets better at mastering herself, until by the end she is fiercely strong, articulate, and independent. At the end of the play, she explains that although Higgins taught her pronunciation, this self-mastery, this most important part of her transformation, hasn't come from copying his manners, because he has none, but from being treated with respect by his housemate, Colonel Pickering. Rehearsals were tough, with 3 very headstrong people: Herbert Beerbohm Tree as Higgins, Mrs. Patrick Campbell as Eliza, and GBS himself as director on the stage. But unlike in the original myth, GBS believed it was impossible for Pygmalion and Galatea to get together at the end. Instead, they bump into each other at his mother's house and talk things out one last time. Now Eliza has learned self-respect, they're finally on equal terms. At the end, Eliza announces,
I shall not see you again, Professor. Goodbye.
And goes to leave. He doesn't believe her. He tells her to run some errands for him while she's out.
And buy me a pair of reindeer gloves, number 8, and a tie to match that new suit of mine.
When she refuses...
Number 8s are too small for you, if you want them lined with lamb's wool. You have 3 new ties which you've forgotten in the drawer of your washstand. What you are to do without me, I cannot imagine.
He still doesn't quite get it, and chuckles to himself, thinking she'll come crawling back. Shaw wrote to Campbell that now comes the most important point of all. When Eliza emancipates herself, when Galatea comes to life, she must not relapse. She must retain her pride and triumph to the end. When Higgins takes your arm on
A consort battleship.
you must instantly throw him off with implacable pride. He recognised the power imbalance in the relationship. Pygmalion is Galatea's creator with a capital C. How could they ever have an equal marriage? He'd never stop trying to correct her. The last thing he does in all versions is order her to do some housework, whether that's buying him gloves or fetching his slippers. But she doesn't want to be treated as a student and a skivvy for the rest of her life. Higgins says himself he doesn't respect Eliza when she's running around after him.
No use slaving for me than saying you want to be cared for. Who cares for a slave?
But Eliza can't go back to her old life. She doesn't fit in Covent Garden anymore.
You know very well that I can't go back to the gutter, as you call it, and that I've no real friends in the world but you and the Colonel.
So she has to make her way as a lady. But Higgins keeps throwing her old life in her face, correcting her grammar.
You're nearer my age than what he is.
Bringing up her past faux pas, making fun of her upbringing.
I tell you, I've created this thing out of squashed cabbage leaves in Covent Garden.
Even while he says he doesn't care about class and treats everyone equally.
You see, the great secret, Eliza, is not a question of good manners or bad manners or any particular sort of manners, but having the same manner for all human souls. The question is not whether I treat you rudely, but whether you've ever heard me treat anyone else better.
So with him, she couldn't really live as a lady either. He'd always be undermining her. Also, Higgins is a jerk to her. I mean, can you imagine living with this guy?
That impudent slut, you!
Of course, now you've been crying. You look as ugly as the very devil, but...
Eliza, you're a fool.
If he does love her, he's got a funny way of showing it. Not to mention the age gap. In the script, Eliza is described as perhaps 18, perhaps 20, hardly older, while Higgins is 40 or thereabouts. Unless you think that sort of thing didn't matter back then, Eliza actually brings it up.
Or would you rather marry Pickering?
I wouldn't marry you if you asked me, and you're nearer my age than what he is.
Shaw wrote, I absolutely forbid any suggestion that the middle-aged bully and the girl of 18 are lovers. Thankfully, Eliza isn't usually actually cast that young. Mrs. Patrick Campbell was 48 to Beerbohm Tree's 61. Audrey Hepburn was 35 to Rex Harrison's 56, and in the Bartlett Share production, Lauren Ambrose was actually 40 to Henry Hadden-Paton's 37. But if Eliza has a better option, in the guise of nice but dim Freddie, who's her age and loves her to bits and treats her right, why wouldn't she take it? Shaw wrote, "Will she look forward to a lifetime of fetching Higgins's slippers? Or to a lifetime of Freddie fetching hers?" But audiences weren't satisfied with Shaw's ending from the beginning. One critic wrote that he was sure she married Henry Higgins and bore him many vigorous and intelligent children. Even the actor who originated Higgins wanted to change it. Long after opening night, when Shaw went back to watch it later, he found that between the last line and the curtain coming down, Higgins had started throwing flowers to Eliza. "My ending makes money, you ought to be grateful," protested Tree, to which Shaw, possibly apocryphally, replied, "Your ending is damnable, you ought to be shot." So to try and set the record straight, he wrote a postscript to the play, which you can still find in printed versions of the script, where he explains his reasons for Eliza marrying Freddie and describes what he imagines would happen after the curtain falls. In his imagined sequel, Eliza and Freddie open a flower shop together, underwritten by Colonel Pickering. So Freddie takes a step down the social class, coming out of gentility to become a tradesman, mirroring Eliza's step up. They never break off contact with Wimpole Street entirely. Pickering is always lending them money, and she gets handwriting lessons from Higgins, but Eliza has her independence and doesn't have to fetch anyone's slippers anymore. In that postscript, GBS expresses his frustration at audiences who see a leading man and a leading lady and assume they must get together at the end. People in all directions have assumed for no other reason than she became the heroine of a romance that she must have married the hero of it. So in 1938, producer Gabriel Pascal persuaded Shaw to let him make Pygmalion into a movie. According to news reports at the time, he'd turned down truckloads of money from Hollywood studios for the rights, only to give them to Pascal for free because he liked the cut of his jib. I really like this movie. Both the leads are fantastic, and they add in stuff that makes a lot of sense to show, like Eliza's elocution lessons and the ball. Shaw was a bit nervous about their choice of leading man for Higgins. Leslie Howard was handsome and known to the public as a romantic lead. Yeah, we'll keep that take in. Whereas Shaw would rather have had a craggy-faced character actor. What if for the cantankerous intellectual, you cast someone who looked more like me? But he wrote a screenplay for them, which adapted the play to film, taking out scene change stuff, adding in a montage, that sort of thing. And he made it very clear his ending was not to be tampered with. He wrote, "All suggestion of a love interest between Eliza and Higgins should be most carefully avoided." So Pascal really wanted to give the film a romantic ending, but for rights reasons he wasn't allowed to add in any new lines. So here's the sneaky, ingenious workaround he came up with. So they have their final scene, and Eliza gets into Freddie's car. Higgins is like, and he has a sad walk home. He listens to her voice on the gramophone,
You wash my face and hands before I come on it.
Which technically isn't a new line. And then, bam, she's back, roll credits.
Where the devil are my slippers, Eliza?
Yeah, let's have our final shot of the movie be the back of this hat. So I guess she was just playing hard to get or something? He didn't have to apologise or work on himself or address any of the very legitimate problems she brought up. He'd barely got through the door before she was back making googly eyes at him. One wonders what has happened to Freddie. Did she duck and roll out of his car? And it's this movie that the musical is based on. After Shaw died and couldn't defend his ending anymore, Pygmalion was adapted into My Fair Lady, one of the best book musicals of all time. From the start, the writers, Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Loewe, knew they wanted a romantic ending. Lerner said of Shaw's original ending, "It's amusing, but a most unsatisfactory and strange ending, and nobody is fooled by it for a minute." So My Fair Lady takes the ending of the 1938 film, but sticks in a final song for Higgins, I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face.
I've grown accustomed to her face.
This does at least make it seem like perhaps some time has passed between her telling him she won't be coming back and... Although it only barely gives Higgins an ounce of character development, he's just as misogynistic as ever.
I'm very grateful she's a woman, and so easy to forget.
And although he does look a bit sad, the best he can say for Eliza, even in the privacy of his own soliloquy, is that he's used to having her around.
Accustomed to her face.
More than any other adaptation, this song really leaves the show on a melancholy, wistful note. In the play, we leave Higgins laughing himself silly over the idea of Eliza marrying Freddie. In the 1938 adaptation, he has a bit of a sad walk, but he's basically fine. In the musical, we get this whole song about being kind of bitter and sad and lonely.
I was serenely independent and content before we met. Surely I could always be that way again. And yet...
Which is a bit of a strange ending for this genre. Like, no big chorus number, no uplifting reprise. I don't think musicals can't have sad endings. Parade and Sweeney Todd spring to mind, but for this era, it's a little unusual. Instead, we have the gramophone bit again, and then the smallest snippet of quiet, sad dialogue.
I washed my face and hands before I come, I did.
Eliza? Where the devil are my slippers?
And then the strings are like, dance the night. So this ending, by dint of appearing in the 1964 movie, has become by far the best known by audiences. And most people just accept that, of course, this story has a romantic ending. And I do think it's an improvement on the 1938 film ending. I mean, it's not the back of a hat. But in a post-Me Too world, I think audiences are only going to get more uncomfortable with the idea of Eliza deciding that the best she can do is this guy. This guy.
Why is thinking something women never do? And why is logic never even tried?
Who won't even give her the security of marrying her.
And you may throw me out tomorrow if I don't do everything you want me to.
Yes.
So that brings us to the 2018 revival at the Lincoln Centre, directed by Bartlett Sher. Sher is known for very lush, faithful productions of Golden Age musicals, where he's clearly thought about tweaking them for modern sensibilities. So his Fiddler on the Roof used an actual Israeli choreographer. Both South Pacific and The King and I featured, hey, actual Asians in the Asian roles. You wouldn't think that'd be a new thing, but it is. So at first, this seems like an exact copy of the musical's ending. And certainly they haven't changed the script. But Harry Hadden-Paton, who plays Higgins, makes a radically different choice with his delivery.
Eliza?
Hands before I come, I do.
Where the devil are my slippers?
Gone is the infuriating smugness, the sense that he's won and was right all along. If he doesn't understand exactly what he did wrong, he does at least know that he f***ed up. He doesn't try and run roughshod over her again, and rather than staring adoringly at him from the background while he puts his feet up, Lauren Ambrose's Eliza strides right off through the fourth wall, down the aisle, into her future. Now, this ending doesn't make much more sense from a timeline point of view. What did Eliza come back for if she's not planning on staying? This doesn't add anything to our understanding of their relationship that we didn't already know, and it still feels a bit deflated compared to the usual high-energy finale song you'd expect in a musical like this. But this ending at least feels more earned, and more in character for these two people that we've spent the whole evening getting to know. So kudos to Bartlett Sher for recognising that she really cannot come back for good. But is there any way we could do even better? Now, if you're used to Shakespeare, for example, you will be very comfortable with chopping up a script as much as you like. You can cut out scenes, you can set it in different locations, you can switch up the genders and the races of the characters, but it's much less common in revivals of musicals. There are exceptions, but if you're going to see, say, Guys and Dolls, you can probably expect to see something that looks like this.
Sit down, you rock, sit down, sit down, sit down, you rock the boat. Sit down, you rock, sit down, sit down, sit down, you rock the boat. Sit down, you rock, sit down, sit down, sit down, you rock the boat. Sit down, you rock, sit down, sit down, sit down, you rock the boat. Sit down, you rock, sit down, sit down, sit down, you rock the boat. Sit down.
Every time. Partly that's because musicals are a much younger art form and mostly not out of copyright, and getting the license to put them on often requires strict adherence to the book, music, and even choreography of the original. And even if a production team radically changes the look of the production, they'll be very hesitant to meddle too much with the book, especially if, like in the case of My Fair Lady, there's a beloved film version that the audience will come in with. But that's not to say it doesn't happen. Shows like Half a Sixpence, Chess, Little Shop of Horrors, Mac and Mabel, and even Showboat have all had drastic changes to their books over the years. It can be done. So if we were brave enough and had the rights to rewrite this more drastically, could we do better? What do we want for them both? We want Eliza to be independent, and we want Higgins to keep his piercing, brash cleverness. So them getting married doesn't make sense, but we don't want them to be out of each other's lives either. We remember the joy of rain in Spain, and we wish that could carry on forever. But it can't. Eliza has grown up, and she can't go back again. In his 1964 essay, The Ending of Pygmalion, A Structural View, Stanley Solomon argues that if Eliza goes back to picking up his slippers and ordering his gloves, then she isn't a real Galatea. She hasn't fully come into her own as a formidable human being. And if she's not a real Galatea, then Higgins hasn't succeeded in his task. All he's done is taught someone pronunciation, which he's done hundreds of times before. He hasn't made a woman.
I said I'd make a woman, and indeed I did.
So what about an ending where, if Higgins can't make living at Wimpole Street any easier for Eliza, he can at least be proud of his accomplishment and recognise her humanity and be a little bit happy for her, rather than wallowing in self-pity. There is a possibility that Shaw once wrote an ending like that. In that same letter to Mrs. Campbell, he writes, "He will go out onto the balcony to watch your departure, come back triumphantly into the room, exclaim, 'Galatea,' meaning that the statue has come to life at last, and 'curtain.' Thus, he gets the last word, and you get it too." Now, this version doesn't exist anywhere in print, so presumably it was a rewrite that Shaw made partway through the show's run. You would have to cut the song "I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face," which is a scary thing to contemplate for a director. It's a meaty song for your lead actor, who's not going to want to let it go, and the audience will be expecting to hear it. But Eliza gets to leave and be her own person, and Higgins has the satisfaction of knowing that he really has made the statue come to life. Eliza is completely transformed, and he takes pride in his work. I like this ending, although modern audiences would have no idea what a Galatea is or why it's relevant, so the substance of the lines would have to change. There's also an ending that Shaw wrote for the 1938 screenplay that's along the same lines. After the last scene, Freddie comes to pick Eliza up, and lets slip that they're planning on opening a flower shop together. After they've gone, Higgins goes for his walk and pictures what Shaw wrote in his epilogue: Eliza behind a shop counter while Freddie serves customers. While he's wandering about, a policewoman asks him if anything's wrong. No, nothing wrong. A happy ending. A happy beginning. Good morning, madam. And strides off into the sunset. In this ending, both of these characters that we've grown to love get their own share of happiness, with neither one subservient to the other. I don't think Lerner and Loewe were wrong to choose the more romantic ending in the 1950s. They were writing for 1950s audiences, and to be clear, they are great writers with a very popular musical that I love. I would not have spent this long talking about a show I did not love to the marrow. We're very lucky with this show. Many popular and beautifully written shows from this era irreconcilably butt up against modern sensibilities. When Nancy or Julie Jordan decides to stay with her domestic abuser,
it is possible, dear, for someone to hit you hard, and it not hurt at all.
Or when Siamese people are afraid of monocles. Modern audiences sort of cringe a bit. The out-of-date politics in shows from this era can't help but date them and drive modern audiences away, which is a shame. But in the case of My Fair Lady, I think Shaw has left us a way to refresh it for modern audiences that may well be its saving grace. Henry Higgins, a phonetics professor. Phonetics professor Henry Higgins. Phonetics professor Henry Higgins. Phonetics professor Henry Higgins. Phonetics professor Henry Higgins. Phonetics professor Henry Higgins.